you check the children? You're a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Freight fans, and I cordially welcome you to the Horror Show. I am Jaime and Fuego, and I am pretty stoked as a, well, I mean, you can see from the hair, you can see that I am a rocker. I am here to discuss the latest release, director Joseph Hahn's film, Ick. And so I went and saw this with Cecil, Laird, who is, busy in the editing bay and doing a lot of things currently. But I just wanted to give some thoughts very briefly here on the Horror Show about this film. So it was a Fathom event. So it was not like a full-on release, but definitely something that I think for a specific contingent of Fright fans will make sense and really resonate. And so you only have the opportunity to see it for a couple days. I'm not sure when it's going to be, as far as this review goes, available. After the fact, it will definitely be something you can check out on VOD, potentially a streamer. But Ick has a lot of pedigree behind it, I think, is the best way to put it, because of the fact that Joseph Hahn has done some incredible, like fan shorts and music videos and all kinds of other things of that nature. And so prestigiousness in that regard. And then in this, you have Brandon Routh, you have Mino Savari, but it is very much a celebration of the time when myself and all of my co-hosts on this channel, whether a couple years above me, a couple years below me, whatever, we are of that Gen X / Zennial sort of contingent where, yeah, we're a little bit older in comparison, and we definitely remember when these sort of songs were coming out. I will still never call myself a frickin' millennial. Yeah, so a pop-punk soundtrack that was even introduced when we saw this film with none other than Ritter, I want to say his name is, guy from All American Rejects. Not one of my personal favorites. I know they went on to bigger success with their second album, and it was like, much more like Kiss Off, sort of, gives you hell or whatever that song was. I like their first album significantly more. The last song is pretty awesome. I'm not as big on Swing Swing, which is used prevalently in this, but long story short, the whole soundtrack is not just pop punk, but just stuff of that early 2000s ilk. You get some Chevelle in there, you get some Creed in there, and there's a joke about Creed where I as a stickler with the dialogue, had to say that they put out an album after Human Clay, guys. It's called Weathered. Anyway, if I'm talking extensively about the soundtrack, because this is a very soundtrack-centric sort of film, it's because of the fact that I felt, if I'm just rounding out overall thoughts, I didn't dislike the script to this movie, because so much of the humor lands. This is a comedic horror creature sort of thing, taking over small town. I mean, if you're gonna just make it any more obvious, they're watching The Blob at one particular point in the damn movie. So yeah, it's a bit on the nose, but so I didn't dislike the script, but the story was where I had a lot of issues. But so as the story goes, the conceits of the story were great, because of the fact that you have Brandon Routh, who starts out as a high school quarterback. He's going to marry Mino Savari. Everything is all hunky-dory and whatever. But unfortunately, the sauce can destroy a lot. Unfortunately, I didn't even realize that was on camera. Damn. Cecil's probably going to be very upset with me about that. But, Alice in Chains, what's your drug of choice? Well, what do you got? I don't go broke, and I do it a lot. But, yeah, man, so... Routh's character has his entire career as a football prospect for, college, potentially the majors thereafter, messed up after an injury, which, he was already faltering and everything was already a little bit messed up, but it gets especially bad and really career-ending when something called the Ick comes up from under the ground and grabs his foot during a pivotal game, costs him maybe a moment of redemption. He already has Minu, dumping him and everything, going with the real estate agent guy that he had encouraged her when they were prom king and queen to, going, hey, just take a dance with this guy. What's the problem with that? So on and so forth. Little did he know, however. But my biggest issue with the ick in general is my biggest issue with the entire movie. And that's because of the fact that the conceit of how it actually, interacts with people and affects them is so convoluted and dropping the F-bomb, fucking stupid. Yeah. And yet they try to explain it away at one particular point in the movie. So Brandon Routh's father, I guess, I didn't even really, because they didn't make it supremely evident. Brandon Routh's father is played by Jeff Fahey, I want to say. And so he was a bar owner, and you don't even have a lot of context about that until it's, revealed later. I mean, show, don't tell, obviously. So they show him and this person drinking. They show all of but there's a dream sequence, or kind of a dreamy sequence, where, and this is not even spoiler, this is just something that happens and doesn't even essentially affect the narrative, but this character explains very briefly how the ick affects everybody differently. With some people, and this is where I'm not going to go into the narrative of how it affects this person or that person or whatever in the spoileriness, but they have somebody come in and, being Fahey, say, yeah, they explain it all the way that there's who's to say. And the ick has apparently been there for years and years at this particular point, and everyone's just like, it's some weird new interplanetary growth, but it's not messing with us. And within the film is when it starts to wreak havoc, and some people get possessed, some people explode, some people it's kind of convoluted, man. And so this is where, as I alluded to earlier, the story of this movie, maybe even not even the story, the mythology, the lore, the logic of this movie sucks ass. However, there is a lot of good in this, in my estimation, most notably from the performances and from the comedic bits. A script is not entirely about, story, and the dialogue in this movie, especially the quips from this, there was one character in particular. He is a love interest of another student that has a connection with the Brandon Routh character, because Brandon Routh's character, after his football days were over, he becomes a science teacher. And as a science teacher, he has a particular student that he has a weird connection to, and she is dating the epitome of the knee-jerk, I read something on socials of any kind, and I'm gonna spout rhetoric, I have a portion of Cherokee in me, or, whatever it may be. This kid is a little douche nozzle, and he ends up, as the story progresses, whatever. But, and then there is a ill-explored subplot with a goth girl and the kid who looks like Hey Jay, just wearing the beanie, obviously. Those two were cute, but they were not given anywhere near enough screen time. And so that's where, since this is a non-spoiler review and we're trying to keep it relatively light, relatively brief, I laughed a lot at the dialogue. I didn't like the way the story was constructed, and maybe that was an edit bay thing, whatever. So that's me giving the yin and the yang of the entirety of the situation. Performances, Routh is very likable. I thought that he was undersold as Superman because of the fact that, Bryan Singer was coming off so hot from those X-Men films, and then Superman Returns underperformed because of a bad script, not because Brandon Routh was a bad Superman. So I give him a lot of credit for doing something different. He was endearing and earnest, and I loved him in this movie, guys. I freaking loved him in this movie. He really just... And yet, he has every, because movie, opportunistic instance to jump in and save the day and everything in situations where how the hell did you know that you should be there at that particular point with that particular character? Script issues, man, script issues. But Yeah, Mina Savari, they do some de-aging with her and Brandon early in the film, where there is like the first 10, 12 minutes of this movie is a music video, 100%. And yet not given a lot of showcase certain songs. The reason I'm looking at you, Hoobastank. You got maybe 12 seconds or whatever it was. But yeah, man, I appreciated the performances all around. There wasn't really, like, everybody was dialed into the comedic yet occasionally earnest sort of vibe of everything. And so Joseph really got that across with his actors very well, in the fact that they were all dialed into the process and the vibe of the screenplay. Screenplay, though. Anyway, where are we as I'm trying to wrap things up without getting into, like, supreme negativity? Because it's not a bat of negativity, man, but there is a moment later in this movie, at the very end, no less, where she's like, are we done yet? I kind of was feeling that near the end. However, the music had me going throughout. There's a reason why this has been promoted so heavily as being almost like a jukebox for when I was coming of age sort of film. Because, yeah, man, I graduated. I'm going to age myself. I'm going to do it. I'm going to throw it out there officially. Graduated in 2002. And so every single song in this movie I knew. Every single freaking one. And I don't know, though, man, when Brandon Routh is saying, "Hey there, Delilah" is a banger, I wanted to punch him in the frickin' face. But it's a very sweet, heartfelt song. Anyway, so yeah, there are needle drops all over the place. I already mentioned the Creeds and the Chevelles and the Blanks and the Good Charlottes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I personally did not like from that era, but I knew it because I watched VH1 and I watched Much Music, or whatever the hell they rebranded themselves as, MTV. I just got cable when I was 16, 17, whatever it was. And so, yeah, man, it's a little too reliant on the needle drops. And also, if I'm going to jump away from the music and everything to the editing and to the technical aspects of this film, it is a hyper edit situation. And I think that with long takes and I feel like hyper edits are a lot of times trying to hide maybe a poor script, but yet it also can be done aesthetically awesomely, sparingly. I think of like Requiem for a Dream, for instance, where there were those specific shots where the made sense. In this particular case, it was constant, almost to the point of exhaustion throughout the entire movie. Cecil leans over to me at one point early on, and he was like, yeah, really, adeptly edited, just constant cuts and everything like that, hyper cuts and all this stuff. I loved it initially, but after a while, as I realized it was going to be like kind of a constant throughout the proceedings, I was a little less there for it. So, but overall, I think that for nostalgia's sake, people from my generation, from my little ilk of that, Zennials, as I call myself, where we were like not quite Gen X, but definitely would never want to identify ourselves with millennials, would probably have a lot of fun with this if you were horror fans, because it's lighthearted. The effects, as I didn't really go into like massive amounts, it does get gory. There's exploding people, there's all kinds of, there's tentacles galore, a lot of it, very CG. I mean, it's all CG, but some of it looks better than other certain aspects. Like, I loved the carnage when it actually got it. But really, for me, at the end of the day, what was significantly more interesting was the Brandon Routh's character and his interaction with another character, since I'm not spoiling things. That was really the heart of this film, and that's what I really liked, maybe more so than anything. Subplot with, other fellow long-haired and the goth girl. I wanted more of that. We just, didn't get it, unfortunately. And biggest criticisms being the lore in this movie and the contradictions and inconsistencies of it. But hey, all you need is a dream sequence Jeff Fahey to explain it all away, that there is no rhyme or reason to it. So why are you scrutinizing our film? Anyway, guys, I extend the grande gracias. I'm Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Tiki-talkies, all the shizzle. But more important than any of my solo silliness is liking, sharing, and subscribing here on The Horror Show. And did you guys see this movie? Because legit, I want to know, did you drop the ducats? It was not an A-list. It was not that sort of thing where you could you had to actually drop the hard-earned dough and respect Joseph's film and the entirety of the people associated with it being a Fathom event and everything. Do you guys think I'm being, like, as neutral, and not even so much neutral, but just, like, level-headed and trying to be from a critical assessment, like give the pros and the cons to what this was all about? Because we do live in a YouTube era where it's either the best thing ever or it's something that was squeezed out by your dog. So, I don't know, man. I liked it well enough. I'm not going to say I loved it, but perhaps I'm a little more forgiving than others. So, I'm Fuego. Y'all been rad status. Like, share, subscribe, give the thoughts about the film. And until next time, Frank fans, remember, stay scared.